right, welcome. Okay, we're going to be we're looking into the book of Romans. This is the second lesson in the book of Romans. We are in chapter 1, and in yesterday's lesson, we went and looked at verses 1 through 17. Today, we're going to be looking at verse 18 and beyond. I don't know how far we're going to get. I don't do notes. I used to, like, when I used to speak in churches and stuff, I used to use notes all the time. I finally came to the realization that I do better if I don't use notes. And so I just, boy, I tell you, every time I get on here, there's somebody out there that's making me itch. All right, so we're going to be looking at verse 18 and beyond. Now, we're going to be getting into some very controversial things. And the only reason it's controversial is because we have become such a secular society. We have become so far removed from biblical principles and removed from God. God was taken out of our schools around 1962, and so kids have grown up with the idea that we evolved from a rock. Basically, if you want to take it back to its original source, well, actually, we evolved from nothing. They teach that the universe, all of a sudden, things just started by themselves. Nothing exploded and created something. So anyway, we're going to be getting into that just a little bit today. Now, what I want us to do, if you go through the book of Romans, there is a train of thought that Paul establishes. He starts out talking about the gospel in verse 16. Now, this is a key verse here in verse 17, which we ended with yesterday. It said, "For therein," that is in the gospel, he says, let me just go back and read, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believes, to the Jew first and also to the Gentile. For therein," that is in the gospel, and in the message that it conveys and the principles that it teaches, "is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith. As it is written," there's a train, "the just shall live by faith." Okay? So the righteousness of God is revealed, in the gospel. All right? This is a key statement here. Because from here forward, all the way through chapter 8, basically, it is comparing God's righteousness to man's righteousness. And the train of thought that Paul establishes is that man's righteousness will never merit favor with God. There's absolutely nothing that we can do as far as salvation is concerned to merit favor with God. The only way that we can merit favor with God is if we have God's righteousness. Oh, sorry, people. It's like 3:45 in the morning. I couldn't sleep, so I got up. So trying to get done with my coffee, and I figured I might as well do something constructive, right? I'm a coffee nut, by the way. So anyway, that's the train of thought that Paul is establishing, is that he's saying that God's righteousness is the only righteousness that matters, and that if a person is going to merit heaven, they must do so with God's righteousness and not their own. All right, and that's the argument that we're going to start seeing here. Now, what he's trying to do is he's trying to get both the Jew and the Gentile to see that their righteousness does not measure up. The Jewish people at this time believed that they were above the Gentile as far as righteousness was concerned because they had the law. Because they had the law, they had the temple, they had what they call the oracles of God. They were above and beyond everybody else on the earth. Now, Paul is going to make the argument that the Gentiles are condemned because of their sin, but then he goes on to show the Jews that you are also condemned because of your sin, and your law does not help you in any way to merit favor with God or to earn salvation. All right, so that's his argument as we get into this. All right, so verse 18, it says, for the wrath of God, now he's saying that the righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel. All right, so now his argument goes, now he's talking about, he's contrasting God's righteousness with man's righteousness, or the righteousness of the Gentiles. Now here's what he says about what he thinks about their righteousness. He says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. I'm sorry, people, I'm just got the itchies. Is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Now, that word hold basically means to suppress. Wow, somebody's up. It's not even 4 o'clock in the morning and somebody's out there driving around. Man, I'd hate to have to get up and go to work this early. Of course, I'm up doing stuff anyway, so who cares, right? All right, so he says, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold or suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Okay, and that's basically what people do. You have people say, I don't believe in God. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. But you suppress it. Why? Because you love unrighteousness. You don't want to be accountable. You don't want to believe that there's a higher power that's going to judge you and that's going to hold you accountable for your sin. You don't want to believe that. All right? But here's the thing. Whether you believe it or not doesn't change it. I don't believe in God. God still exists, and he's still going to judge you, and you're still going to be accountable to him, whether you believe it or not. Your belief or unbelief doesn't change truth. So you can argue against it all you want, but you're still going to stand before God someday, and you're going to find out that this book is true. Just saying. All right, so he says they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. They want to hang on to their sin. They want to live their profligate lifestyle. They don't want to be accountable. They suppress it. Now, he goes on to exposit that a little bit more. He says, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. In other words, he's saying that which may be known of God. Boy, I'm telling you. I'm sorry, I apologize, people. I've got there's allergies or something. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. It's obvious. For God has showed it unto them. God has revealed himself to you. Well, God hadn't done it. God didn't, he hadn't shown it to me. I haven't seen no burning bush, or I haven't seen no, God has manifested himself to everybody. This saying that I don't believe in God, you're lying to yourself. I don't want my coffee to get cold. He says it's manifest in them for God who showed it unto them. Now, how has he done that? Well, Paul goes on to say, he says, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. And this is what kills me. In some of my other videos, I've talked about the design, and I actually had people come on here and say, I don't see any design in the human body. Are you serious? See, this is what Paul talks about when he says that men suppress the truth. You don't see any design in nature. You don't see any design in the human body. You don't see any design in the universe, how everything works in synchronization. And if it did not work in synchronization, there would not be life on this planet. Your body would not be alive if everything in your body didn't work in synchronization. And what happens when things get out of sync? You get sick or you die. Life is fragile. Everything has to be working. You don't think there's any design in the human body? If you can look at the human body, look at the human eye, which man cannot even come close to coming up with anything that rivals. Imagine all of the millions of nerve endings that coming out from your brain that make your body function. The fact that you have consciousness. You can't explain that by a rock exploding, people. No matter how hard you try. He says they are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. If you see a building, you know somebody has built that building. You see a car driving down the street, it didn't just appear, somebody had to build it. You see this earth, you see the human body, you see all the animals, you see everything that has been created. He says it's clearly seen by the things that are made. Even his eternal power and Godhead, or his godly nature, so that they are without excuse. You cannot stand before God someday and say to him, you never showed me that you existed. You are without excuse. Because anybody with a half an ounce of common sense can look at the things that are made and say, yeah, somebody had to make that. Somebody said, well, who made God? Nobody made God. God is an eternal being. God exists and has existed and will exist from all eternity to all eternity. In fact, there was no such thing as time until God created the heavens and the earth, and the evening and the morning were the first day. That is when time began. God does not exist within the limitations of time or space. So you're without excuse, because anybody with a half an ounce of common sense can look at the things that are made and say, yeah, somebody had to make that. There has to be a God. He says, because that, now he's talking about the Gentiles. He says, because that when they knew God, okay, there was a time they knew God. There was a time that they acknowledged God. There was a time when they were close to God. He says, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Now here's the scary thing, people. There comes a point where you say no to God for so long that your heart becomes so hard, your heart becomes so dark, your very being becomes so anti-God, is so removed from God that it's darkened. And when that happens, you have no hope. Now, when that occurs, we don't know. God is very patient. God is very kind. God is very long-suffering, the Bible says. But there does come a point where God says, fine, you've rejected me for so long. Depart from me. Just like he said about Ephraim is joined to his idols, leave him alone. The tribe of Ephraim, God said, you know what? That's it. My patience has come to an end. Leave him alone. It says they became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. God is patient, God is long-suffering, God is loving, but he said, my spirit will not always strive with man. God gives you plenty of chances. But then there comes a point where God says, that's it. Depart from me. Now here's this next verse. If this is not indicative of how things are today. He says, their heart was darkened. He says, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. There's a lot of educated idiots today. There really is. You have these people that think they're so intellectual and they're so smart, and oh, you people are so archaic, believing in these old fairy tales about God. And as I've said before, if you believe that that nothing exploded and created everything that you see today, that is the ultimate fairy tale. To believe that there's a supernatural being that created all things is common sense. It's common sense. But you have these intellectuals who are not intellectual at all. They think they are. You see the pride and the ego. I am too smart to believe in God. No, you're dumb. You're stupid. You're an idiot. I don't think you should call me that. Well, you are. I'm sorry, I'm just being honest. Because you don't want to be accountable. That's the whole crux of the matter. You don't want to be accountable to God. But you are anyway. Whether you think so or not, you still are. And when you die, you're going to find that out the hard way. But by then, it's too late. There is no mercy. Any mercy that you receive before you die. If you die without Christ, you die without God, you will face the eternal consequences of having rejected him. And you may be an intellectual and you laugh at that and you think that we believe in all these fairy tales and stuff like that. Let's face facts, dude. They're dudettes. let's face facts. Nothing can create itself. If you think it can, you tell me that's being intellectual? You tell me that's being smart? Show me the scientific evidence for that. Show me where anything has ever created itself. You do realize evolution breaks every known law of science known to man. Even the second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy, basically says evolution can never happen. Things do not evolve, they break down. As I've said before, you have a deer or some other animal that gets hit by a car and killed and it's laying there alongside the highway. What does it do? Do all those particles come together and create another being? No. And there's nobody out here listening to this that would think that. But yet you think it can happen? Originally. Well, back then, evolution stopped. No, doofus. What are you basing that on? The only thing you're basing it on is, well, I just don't want to believe in God. That's what the whole thing's about, dude. That's what the whole thing's about. You just don't want to believe in God. You want to suppress the truth in your unrighteousness. That's what it all boils down to. You don't want to admit God exists. No, lay down. Copper. My dog is being a pain this morning. You don't want to admit. Look, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to make you see the folly of your way. I'm trying to make you look at things from a rational perspective. You think that we're irrational, those of us who believe the Bible. You think we're the irrational ones. No. No, we're not. We don't believe in impossible theories that science disproves. Wow, matter can't create itself. That's what you think, is that it can somehow. But I've had people argue with me and say, well, matter can't create itself. No, it can't. But God can create it. See, the supernatural, invisible things of God can be seen by the things that are made. That's what Paul says here. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Then it says, see, we're watching a progression here. This is what happens to a society that continually keeps stepping away from God, rejecting God, and following their own wills and their own ideas. It says that they changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. How often we see, archaeology. Archaeology, we see these idols. And a lot of times these idols are made in the image of some animal, whether it's a snake or a wolf or a whatever, owl, like the Bohemian Grove that we talked about, the 40-foot tall owl. Yeah, see. That's exactly what we see. That's what we see in this society. Yeah, people. I mean, how stupid do you have to be to think that you have to worship an owl? People. It amazes me. You can't fix stupid, right? It says, because of that, because they rejected God and they'd rather substitute religion. Now, look, and here's the thing, people. There's a big difference between Christianity, being a true Christian, and religion. Religion is, following a set of rules or whatever, that you set up to make yourself feel like you're righteous. Christianity is a relationship with God. It has nothing to do with the rules, but yeah, and I know that I used to be in churches that, you can't do this, can't do that, can't do that. My standards are tougher than yours, so my church is better. No. In fact, we're going to see as we get into this that Paul says that people that have all these taboos about everything are the weak Christians. It's going to be a while before we get into that, but we're going to get into it. All right, now, they suppressed the truth. They thought they were too smart to believe in God. But yet they still have that innate inner desire to worship something. And it says, wherefore, in verse 24, wherefore, okay, now, I remember when I was, one of my pastors used to say, whenever you see a wherefore or therefore, you want to see what it's actually there for. All right? So wherefore, in other words, because of the things that Paul just said, because of these things that man has done, it says, wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. This is the point that we are getting to in this nation. This is the progression that you see. First of all, they had a relationship with God. They stopped acknowledging God. They thought they were too smart to believe in God. They started following their own way, and finally we get to the point where society progresses to what we see today in our own nation, and that is this, what they call the sexual revolution, the hookup culture, where no longer is sex an act between a husband and wife. It's a recreational activity, like we see today. It says God gave them up. That's scary, people. When you get to the point where God says, go ahead, go your own way, and you start seeing what we see with the hookup culture today in our own country and all over the world, but it's not as bad in a lot of places as it is here in the U.S. It has lost its sacredness and has become a recreational activity, which is the sign that we've pretty much reached the point where God's given up on this country. And there's going to be some bad things happen. It says that they dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Now, I was going to get into this today, but I think as long as this lesson already is, because this is going to take some time to get into. And it's going to not be good for a lot of people. It's going to be very controversial, but I'm sorry, I have got to speak what God says. If you want to go ahead and read ahead and see what we're going to be talking about next time, I'll guarantee you there's going to be a lot of people. A lot of people. I've already ticked some people off one time talking about this, and I didn't go into it with nearly the detail I plan on doing in the next lesson. I have people that unsubscribe from me, think I'm a jerk, think I'm what, honestly, I really don't care what you think of me. The only thing I want you to think of me is this: am I speaking the truth of the Bible? Am I speaking the Word of God? Am I speaking what God is saying? That is the only thing I want you to judge. If I'm doing that, then if you don't like it, if it makes you mad, I'm not trying to make anybody mad, but I am going to speak what the Bible says. So we'll be getting into that tomorrow, or whenever it is I do the next lesson. It'll probably be tomorrow. But I forgot what I was going to say. But anyway, that's all I wanted to cover for today, because I think, like I said, you can read ahead and you can think about the things that we've talked about today. All right? We'll see you in the next lesson.